Okay, YouTube, in my last video, we had talked about how we can graph ordered pairs in the xy coordinate plane and then use that concept to say graph equations such as y equals 4 minus x. We graphed that here. Or we had an absolute value equation, y equals absolute value of x plus 1. In this video, what I'd like to do is actually just show how we can also create these using a computer-aided device. So you'll notice that these two graphs right here are just screenshots of those two graphs that I put into my calculator. What I'd like to do is actually just walk people through how you could use a graphing calculator in order to create these graphs in the first place, and then we'll look at how we change the viewing window and how you make tables from graphs as well, or a graphing utility. So starting with this, if you want to go ahead and make a graph of an equation, the very first button you want to learn is this y equals button in the top left. And also, all of these top buttons here, we will use those for graphing, aids, okay? So going to y equals, let's go ahead and start by typing in our equations. Our first equation we had was 4 minus x. Now, 4 minus, there's a difference between this key and the subtraction key. You want to use the subtraction key to indicate subtraction, whereas use this key to indicate negative. So we have 4 minus x, and then the other thing is that our x key is this button right here to the right of our alpha key. So 4 minus x, we're going to put this in for y1, our first equation. I'll hit enter, and then we'll go down here. And if you want to use absolute value, I'll tell you this, I don't see an absolute value button here. What you're going to have to do is go to this, behind the zero it says catalog, okay? So we're going to have to hit second, and you should see your cursor change to this up arrow here, and then we say catalog, and the very first option here is ABS. And if I hit enter on this, that is, as a matter of fact, the absolute value bar function there. So if I said, well, absolute value bar x plus 1 is what we had here. You have to end the absolute value, but we'd say absolute value of x plus 1. If we want to graph this, then all I need to do is actually just hit the graph key. And you'll notice that here was my initial line, and here's my absolute value graph, and I've actually got these paired together here, okay? So what we want to do is start by noticing a few things about this window, starting with, I noticed that we say that this viewing window, if you look at this right here, it says is negative 10, positive 10, 1, and negative 10, positive 10, 1, and we often list it this way, but we'd say what it's really indicating is the minimum x value along the x-axis is negative 10. So on both of these pictures here, you can see that negative 10 is as far left as it's going, okay, and it goes to positive 10. So that's going to be our x max on the right side there. But x min is our negative 10, x max is our positive 10, and that's what these two pieces of information are telling us. Now this third piece of information on each of these that you see here in these brackets is the scale. You'll notice that each of these brackets, the left one corresponds to the x values. These are x values. And then the y values correspond to always the second thing that we list here. But the scale is basically telling you the distance between the notch marks on your graph. So if I went negative 10 to 10, since the scale is 1, I'm going by ones, essentially, okay? And the same thing on our y-axis, negative 10 to 10, we're going by 1. So I have negative 10 to 10, and our scale is 1s. So really quickly, before we start messing around with this window, I want to point something out here. You'll notice that graphing calculators, at least TIs, they are longer in a horizontal distance than in vertical. So your graph doesn't really look like it actually looks like, because it's kind of distorted the way we represented the width to height ratio, but it still gives a good representation of what you can see. So really quickly here, I asked this question up here. I say, what's the meaning of negative 2, 3, a half, and negative 10, 20, a half? Essentially, what we're saying here is this. In a window that would be negative 2, 3, a half, and you'll notice that this window here actually has numbers on it. They're not often listed, okay? They're not ever listed as far as I know, but it just means that we're starting at negative 2 and going to positive 3 on the x-axis, and we're going by increments of a half. Our scale is a half. You can see that here. And then likewise on the y-axis, we're starting down at negative 10, we're proceeding up to positive 20, and we happen to be going by 5. So that's what that would mean. What I want to do now is let's use our window menu to change the viewing window to the following settings, and then what we'll do is we'll sketch what we see, labeling key values. So I've already given us some x settings here, and I've already given us some y settings here. So we have min, max, scale, min, max, scale. Going over to my calculator here, what I'm going to do is actually this. I'm going to go over to my y equals, and these equal signs here, if you click enter on those, you'll notice that they like unhighlight themselves. So if I go back to the graph, you can't actually see them, but the button we want to play around with here to change window settings actually just says window, and it's right next to y equals right there. So when you pull this open, you'll notice that these are exactly the values we just got done talking about. So when I want to type this in, negative 100 to 150, you don't have to delete this. You can just start typing. You hit negative 100 in this case, and I'll hit enter, and we say 100. So we're going from negative 100 to 100, and we're going by 50s. So we'll go by 50s, 50. And then our y-axis here, we'll go negative 100, and we also want to go up to 100 here, 100. And we want to go by, it seems in this case, tens. So if I were to look at this now, I say hit graph, whoops, Ooh, window range error. What this means is I probably typed something in out of order. So we have negative 100 to 100 by 50s. That's where it was. This y min cannot be equal to the y max. I needed to put a negative in there, so negative 100. Now I'll try this again. But what we get is this picture right here. So I have an x-axis, y-axis. We'll go ahead and sketch this in. Looks like this. But I noticed that there was a notch mark out here, 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 and here. And labeling key values, I say, well, this is negative 100, this is 100. And these would be like negative 50 and 50. And as far as this axis goes, we would say, well, I'm going to label this negative 100 and this 100. And we have, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But essentially, that's how our window option looks. So the last thing I want to do in this video before we tune out of it is essentially, if I get my calculator back out here, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to zoom and hit 6. Right here where it says zoom 6, okay? Zoom standard. You'll notice that we got dropped back to our standard window, which are these values over here. And I'm also going to turn my graphs back on just by going over the equal signs and hitting equal again and turning them back on. But what I want to do is show you that you can actually make a table of values from a calculator as well. So using these two equations that we've had, 4 minus x and y equals x, absolute value of x plus 1, what we need to do is look right behind graph. We have the word table, okay? And that table actually is just going to show us a table of an x and y pairs that we usually create by hand. It's just going to do it for us. So if I hit table right now, I say table, you'll notice that my table starts at an x value of 0 and is going up by 1 each time. And so what you would see here is for at least our xy pairs here, we have 0, 4, 1, 3, 2, 2. I'm going to show you this in our first video. We said, you know, we have 0, 4, 1, 3, 2, 2. These are precisely the same values that we are getting on our calculators now, okay? So what I want to do is I actually want to show that you can start your table in different places by going right behind window. Just like you can change your graph setting window, you can change your table setting kind of window by going right behind window and going to table set. And really the questions they're going to ask are these: where do you want your table to start? And so I had my table starting at 0. What if I did want to start it at negative 3? All I have to do is change this to negative 3. Just type in negative 3. And this delta table, this triangle table, basically, what if I change this to 2? I want you to see what happens. If I go to my table, you'll notice that it starts at negative 3 and it's spaced apart by 2's. So whereas when we went to window, let me turn that off. We go to window and we have scale. When we go to delta or table here, table set, this delta table tells us what we're going by, and I want to go by 1's. So I'll start my table at negative 3 and go by 1's. And this is essentially, if I go back to table here, this is the same tables that we created for the last video there when we created these by hand. So what I want to do before we leave off here is I'm going to clear these out. In this last example, it says use your graphing utility to just really quickly create a table of values for y equals x squared plus 1. And we want to go from starting at negative 3 up to 3 by increments of 1. So really quickly, this is pretty easy to do with a graphing utility. We're going to type in x to the power of 2. And you know what? Actually, you can hit, if you have a squared term here, you can just hit x squared like this also. And we say plus 1. And so plus 1. And then we'll go to table set. Table set, we want to start at negative 3 and go by 1. So we've already got that established. But using this, we could say negative 310, negative 2, 5. So let's make our table here. Let's say x and y. We have negative 3, 10, negative 2, 5. I'll get this calculator back out here. We have negative 1, 2, 0, 1. So we have negative 1, 2, 0, 1. Sorry to flip back and forth here. And we have 1, 2, 2, 5. So we have 1, 2, 2, 5. And I know that this is going to be 3, 10. But that's how you use a calculator to quickly graph equations as well as look at their tables of values. Cheers.